Hello guys, and welcome back to the DocMack car channel. And today what I'm going to show you is how to purchase a used car. Now there are a lot of things to cover, so I'm going to do it in about 3 segments. Now this segment is going to cover the engine, the gearbox and the differential on a rear wheel drive car. I'm going to use 3 different cars for this video so that you guys can actually know the difference and exactly what you need to check for. Please consider subscribing if you haven't already. It's completely free to subscribe, and I'm going to post 3 different videos on how you can purchase a used car. So without further ado, let's get into it. So now when you're going to inspect the vehicle, always try to ask the owner if at all they cannot start the engine, because you want it to be stone cold when you're actually going to inspect the vehicle. So now the first thing we're going to do is we are going to check the engine oil. So what you want to do is, when the engine is cold, you want to pull the dipstick out, and then you want to clear off any of the oil here. And now what you're also looking for is, you can see that the oil looks relatively good. Now this oil has done about 3,500 kilometers. Now what you're looking for is, you're looking for like a milkshake sort of looking thing. It looks like chocolate milk or chocolate yogurt. If you see that, then that would probably indicate that a head gasket leak has actually occurred. So those are the things you need to check for. So now what you want to do is, you want to put the dipstick all the way back in again until you click it back down. And then you're going to pull it out, and then you're going to hold it level. And as you can see, that's the maximum line. So this one would show you that it is quite good engine oil and it's quite well maintained. Now I'm going to get into the parts cost and what are the common parts you need to look for in each vehicle before you purchase them, because on certain vehicles it's very expensive. Now what you need to do is, you need to open up the engine oil filler cap. And now what you're going to do is, you're going to look for the same thing right here. You're going to look for like chocolate milk substance, and as you can see, no chocolate milk substance at all. This one is not just a verifier. What you need to do is, you actually need to put your hand closer to the valve cover. Under the valve cover here, what you're going to do is, you're going to put your hand around this area, and what you're going to look for is any metallic flakes, or if at all you see like chocolate milk, then that could be, let's say, timing chain wear or something, could be metallic flakes. And chocolate milk could be things like a head gasket leak where the coolant has mixed with the engine oil. And also you can also check in the coolant reservoir. I'm going to show you what to check shortly. So now I'm relatively happy with that one, so we're going to cap it back. And again guys, always make sure the engine is stone cold when you're doing this. The next thing you'll need to check is the cooling system. So what you need to do here is, you need to pull out the expansion tank cover. And now what you can do is check underneath here to see if at all you can see any fibers in there. Now if you can see any sort of fiber in there, then what it could be is, it could be head gasket sealer. Now certain head gasket sealers kind of form like a fiber thing after some time, so that's what I want to look for. So as you can see, the coolant inside is nice and bright pink. So Toyota uses bright pink coolant for their newer vehicles. This is a 2012 Toyota Camry. It's a 4-cylinder engine. Now you want to make sure that it is using the correct coolant, because if you see something like a green color coolant, yes, it might be usable, but it's not what the manufacturer recommended, and that could indicate that they are using a cheaper coolant than what is recommended. Green doesn't always mean it's cheap, but you always want to make sure that they're using what's recommended by the manufacturer. So the same thing, this is the radiator cap, and what you're going to do is turn the radiator cap and open it. As you can see, it's nice and it's pink, and there are no pieces of fiber in there, which could be from head gasket sealer. Let's say if somebody tried to shaft you, they could head gasket seal the engine. So for those of you who do not know what a head gasket is, so basically this is your engine valve cover, and here is where the camshaft is, and then the timing chain is also there. Now there's 2 portions of the engine. So you got your engine block, which is right down the bottom, and then you've got your cylinder head. Your cylinder head, the bottom of your cylinder head and the engine block in between is actually a head gasket. Now if that starts leaking, then coolant will get into your engine oil, the exhaust gases will get into the coolant expansion tank as well as your cooling system, and the coolant will also get into the combustion chamber, and therefore exhaust gases can actually get into the cooling system. Now what we're doing here is we're not doing our pre-purchase inspection and then we're saying it's all good. Well, for me it is, but for you guys, if you don't know much about cars, what you're doing is you're filtering to see if you are happy that you're going to purchase this car, and then get a pre-purchaser to look at it. All right, so what you guys can do also is, if you do suspect maybe there's a head gasket leak or whatever, you can ask your technician to do a block tester, which is your engine block tester. And what they do is they actually hook it up to your filler cap, and then what they'll do is they'll press this thing. It's basically a blue color liquid which changes to yellow if at all you do have a head gasket leak. So that's one way to check it, but you're just doing all the basic checks for now. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to test the battery with a multimeter. So what we're going to do now is we're going to turn it on, and then we're going to turn it to DC volt 20. Touch the positive on the positive, negative on the negative, and as you can see, that's 12.38 volts, which means that the battery is very good. Now what we're also going to do is we're going to test the alternator in a while, just some basic tests on the alternator. So now the alternator should be charging the battery. Guys, so as you saw just now when I turned it on and I touched the terminals, positive to positive, negative to negative, you saw it was 12.34 volts just with the battery, and when I started the vehicle you saw it actually climbed to about 14.2, 14.3. That means the alternator is charging the battery properly. So now what you also need to do is you need to turn on the headlights, you can turn on the aircon compressor and things like that, and you should see it start to drop down and then go back up again. That would also mean that the alternator is working properly. Now if you see it just drop to about 12, then your alternator may have issues, so that's another way of actually testing it. This is your brake fluid reservoir. Now for those of you in the US, it'll be on the left hand side because this is always the closest side to the driver. Now this is a right hand drive vehicle, but most of the parts are exactly the same. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this cap out, and I'm going to look in here, and as you can see in here, it looks like a nice thin honey color, and that is quite a healthy brake fluid color, so you don't need to worry about that one. That looks quite good. And when you're putting it back, make sure you hold the cylinder first down the bottom with your hand, and then you press it shut. So the other thing we also need to look at is with the airbox. Now you can actually do a quick check through the airbox right here. Just pop these clips. On some cars it's not as easy as this, and then all you can do is you can actually take a peek here and pull the filter out. I have a specific video on how you can change the engine air filter. You can see that, but you might want to just get this one looked at. Now if you see a clean engine air filter, good battery, the coolant is good, that would already show you that the owner does take care of the vehicle quite well. Now the other thing you also need to look at is the parts cost on a vehicle. The water pump on this engine is actually driven by a serpentine belt, yet on some vehicles it's an electronically controlled water pump. So on this engine, about $400, you should be able to sort out a water pump. Alright guys, and this is your alternator. Now that's why we did a basic test on the alternator just now. This alternator shouldn't be too expensive to repair. Probably about $300 should sort you out an alternator, and that's driven by the serpentine belt. Now you will need to also just check and feel the serpentine belt. This is a serpentine belt, which is basically what drives your accessories. The crank shaft drives the crank pulley, and the crank pulley drives the serpentine belt. So this is your alternator, your aircon compressor is down there, and this car does not have a hydraulic power steering. It's got an electronic power steering. So there's no power steering fluid to actually check on this vehicle, but my BMW does have a hydraulic power steering, so I'm going to show you that when I jump onto that car. Now this is a 4-cylinder engine. Now you need to see which type of engine you're going to buy. You got 4 cylinders, you got V6, V8s, and you got a straight 6 as well. I'm going to show you what the differences are. So with this one, you've got 1 cylinder head You have got one valve cover gasket, and you've got one valve cover just in case you need to change it. So it's not too expensive to repair on a 4-cylinder engine. Now this is my Toyota Camry. It has a V6 engine in it, and now this one has got 2-cylinder heads, 2 valve covers, and 2 valve cover gaskets. So it's got 2 banks. So it's got one bank right here and one bank right here. So hence the V6, because of the V configuration. Now this is a front wheel drive vehicle, so that's why it is that way. Now if this is a rear wheel drive vehicle, the V6 will be this way. Now the spark plugs on the back of the vehicle is quite difficult to replace for the user who doesn't know much about vehicles, because you have to take out the intake plenum right here, and it's below the intake plenum, and that's where the remainder 3 spark plugs are. The first 3 spark plugs are under here, which is very easy to replace. So you need to look out for any documentation which does show that the spark plugs have been done, and you have also got to check for any valve cover leaks as well. So you can pull this one out like so. It's just held in by pegs. All right, and this is the first 3 spark plugs. This is what I'm talking about. And if you look at around the valve cover gasket right here, it's completely dry, there's nothing. And that's the other valve cover gasket right here, completely dry, nothing. So these are telltale signs. If you see oil here and oil there, you probably are going to spend at least $500. And if you do have a leak there, your spark plugs could get soaked in oil, and that could also cost you a lot of money. So these are the things you need to check. Alright guys, you know how I was talking about the water pump earlier? Now if the owner claims that the water pump has been replaced, also make sure that the thermostat has been replaced. They are right adjacent to each other, and while you're already there, might as well replace those things as well. Now what you also need to find out is whether it's a direct injection engine or a multi-point or pod injected engine. So this one here is a multi-point injected engine. So multi-points are much more easier to maintain, and they do not have a lot of carbon buildup, whereas your gasoline direct injection engines do have a lot of carbon buildup. So direct injection engines are really good for fuel economy and power, but it's only when they actually suffer the carbon buildup that's when you gotta run into a lot of expensive repairs. And if the fuel injectors fail on a direct injection, you are talking about probably $400 an injector. So the fuel injectors are located around here at the back. Alright guys, so the next thing you want to find out is whether fuel injector cleaner has been used in your vehicle, if it's a injected engine, petrol injected engine. The other thing you need to do is you need to find out if the fuel filter and the fuel pump had been replaced at any time. You don't always need to replace the fuel pump, but the fuel filter will need to be replaced, if that can cause it to clog up your fuel injectors. Now the other thing you also need to do is you need to find out whether your engine is a timing chain engine or a timing belt engine. So basically on the side here over the cam cover, you can see that this one is made of steel on the side. Now if you see plastic right here, that means it's a timing belt. Now a timing belt kit can cost around about $1,000 to replace the whole thing, which would be your idler pulley, your idler bearing, and all those good stuff on the side. Now that is quite expensive, in about $1,000 to do the whole job for a technician to do it for you. Now cam chains, sometimes people overlook doing the water pump, because a cam chain basically lasts the life of the engine. Now on certain models of vehicles, the cam chain can actually fail. So the cam chain can actually stretch, the cam chain guides can actually go, and plastic pieces can start to wear down. Your engine will have a lot of slack in it, and you could also have a lot of plastic piece down in your oil sump. Alright guys, and the other thing you also need to do is you just need to verify the cost of the starter motor. Now that doesn't need to be replaced, but in case it does fail on some vehicles, the starter motor is relatively easy to replace. Where my hand is, yep, that's the starter motor right there. Now on certain vehicles it's quite hard to replace, but on this vehicle it's relatively easy to replace. Alright guys, the other thing you need to find out is on the vehicle that you're going to purchase, what type of transmission it has. Your conventional automatic transmission, your CVT transmission, which is a continually variable transmission or your dual clutch transmission. Now the CVT transmissions are good, but they can be very costly to repair if they go wrong. So my suggestion is to go for a conventional transmission engine. So this one has got a conventional transmission in it. Now the CVT transmissions have got a steel belt across the gearbox, and that can be quite expensive to repair as well. Alright guys, the other thing also is you may have heard that on transmission fluids in vehicles that they are for the life of the gearbox. That is not entirely true. Now when they say it's for the life of the gearbox, it's for the life of the warranty of the vehicle. Now on this vehicle you need to change the ATF fluid, the automatic transmission fluid, at 90,000 kilometers. That's what the manufacturer suggests, but most manufacturers says you don't need to, and that's not always the case for all the transmissions. So that's something you need to take into account. The other thing you need to also take into account is a service history. Now just because somebody tells you that something has been done is good, but you also want to have some sort of proof. So ask them for any service records or any receipts for the work that they have done.